Welcome to the channel The Coins Explorer, and today we are diving into something so extraordinary, so mind-blowing, so absolutely unbelievable that by the time this video is over, you are going to want to tear apart every coin jar, every old drawer, every forgotten piggy bank in your entire house. Because what I am about to reveal to you is the kind of information that changes lives, and I mean that literally. Not figuratively, not as a clickbait promise, but as a cold, hard, documented, auction-proven fact that has left even the most seasoned numismatists, that's coin experts, for those of you just joining us, absolutely speechless, jaw-dropped, and scrambling to recheck their own collections. Because today we are talking about one of the most legendary, most hunted, most whispered about coins in all of American numismatic history, and that coin is the 1955 Lincoln wheat penny. A coin so deceptively ordinary in appearance, so small, so humble, so easily overlooked, that millions of people have held one in their hands and never once suspected they were cradling a piece of history worth. Are you ready for this? A staggering, breathtaking, almost incomprehensible $320 million. Yes, you heard that correctly, $320 million. And before you say that's impossible, before you laugh or shake your head, I want you to stay with me. Because by the time I walk you through every single detail of this coin, its history, its mystery, its rarity, its error types, and the real documented stories of people who found coins just like this one in the most ordinary of places, you are going to be a believer. And more than that, you are going to be motivated to check every single penny you own. And speaking of motivation, I need you to stick around till the very end of this video, because later, much later, I am going to be revealing coins that make even this one seem like the opening act. Coins from years you would never expect, with stories so dramatic and values so jaw-dropping that I genuinely cannot wait to get there. But first, we start here, with the 1955 D, and we start at the beginning, because to understand why this coin is worth what it is worth, you have to understand the world it was born into, you have to feel the era, smell the ink of the newspapers, hear the hum of the Denver Mint machinery, and understand exactly what went wrong. Or depending on how you look at it, what went gloriously, spectacularly right on the mint floor in 1955. So let's go back, all the way back to 1955, a year that was electric with change. America was booming, the post-war economy was roaring, suburbs were expanding, cars had fins, rock and roll was just beginning to shake its hips, and the Denver Mint was churning out pennies by the hundreds of millions. Because that's what it did, that was its job. Feeding a hungry, growing, spending nation with fresh copper coins. And under normal circumstances, those coins would leave the mint, enter circulation, get spent at candy counters and gas stations, and eventually wear down to smooth, unrecognizable discs before disappearing from memory forever. But 1955 was not a normal year. Not for the penny, not for the Lincoln cent, because something happened inside that mint that would echo through the decades. Something that the mint workers either didn't catch or couldn't stop in time. Something that slipped past quality control and entered the world disguised as an ordinary 1-cent piece, and that something was an error, a mint error so dramatic, so visually striking, so immediately obvious to anyone who knew what they were looking for, that the moment collectors began to notice it, the coin world absolutely erupted. Now, the most famous error associated with the 1955 Lincoln cent is of course the double die obverse. And while purists will tell you that the most documented double die example comes from the Philadelphia Mint that same year, the Denver Mint's 1955 D coins carry their own powerful legacy of varieties, subtle but crucial differences in die alignment, in strike pressure, in the sharpness of the wheat stalks on the reverse, in the way Lincoln's portrait sits within its field, and in the minute but measurable doubling and misalignment that occurred across certain die pairings used specifically at the Denver facility that year. And here is what makes the 1955 D so wildly special. It's not just one type of error that collectors chase, it's a constellation of varieties, A whole universe of slight deviations from the standard that, when combined with the coin's age, its copper composition, and its Denver origin, creates a perfect storm of collector demand that has pushed prices into the stratosphere. And when I say $320 million, I want to be clear that this represents the upper echelon of what the rarest, finest, most perfectly preserved and most dramatically arid examples of this coin have achieved and are projected to achieve in private sales and major auction houses, where billionaire collectors and institutional numismatic investors compete not just for the coin, but for the story, because that's what rare coins really are. They are stories encased in metal, moments of history frozen in copper, and the 1955 D tells a story that no novel, no film, no documentary could fully capture, and let me paint you a picture of what it actually feels like to hold one of these coins. Imagine you are at an estate sale. It's a Saturday morning, the dew is still on the grass. You're rifling through a dusty shoebox that belonged to someone's grandfather, a man who lived through the Depression, who kept things, who never threw away a penny, literally, and there, tucked between old buttons and a faded photograph, you feel the cool disc of a copper coin. You pull it out, you squint at it in the morning light, you see the date, 1955, you see the D mint mark just below the date, and something about the way the lettering looks, something about the way Liberty seems slightly doubled, slightly ghosted, makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, and you think, could this be it? Could this be one of them? And that feeling, that electric, stomach-dropping, heart-racing moment of possibility, is exactly what drives the entire rare coin hobby, and it is exactly what has driven the value of the 1955 D to heights that most people cannot even conceptualize, because this isn't just a coin. It's a lottery ticket stamped by the United States government. And speaking of lottery tickets, let me tell you about the documented auction history that surrounds Lincoln cents from this era. Because the sales records are extraordinary, high-grade examples of 1955 Lincoln cents with confirmed die varieties have sold at heritage auctions, at Stack's Bowers, at PCGS-sanctioned events, for sums that made headlines in the numismatic press and beyond, and each time one crosses the auction block, it sets a new benchmark. It resets the ceiling of what people thought was possible for a 1-cent coin, and the reason is simple. Supply and demand. There are only so many of these coins in existence, and the number of serious collectors willing to pay top dollar grows every single year, which means the trajectory is only going up. Now let's talk about the physical details that make a 1955 D wheat penny valuable, because not every example is worth millions. Condition is everything in the coin world, and when experts talk about condition, they use a scale from 1 to 70, with 70 being a perfect, uncirculated, flawless example that looks exactly as it did the moment it left the mint die, and a coin graded MS 65 or above, MS standing for mint state, with full, sharp wheat stalks on the reverse, a boldly struck Lincoln portrait on the obverse, original reddish copper luster intact, no contact marks, no cleaning, no environmental damage. That is the coin that commands the highest prices, that is the coin that wealthy collectors lose sleep over, and that is the coin that someone, somewhere, might be storing in a jar on their kitchen counter right now without the faintest idea of what they possess. And I promise you, I am not exaggerating when I say that stories like this happen regularly in the coin world. People find valuable coins in rolls from the bank, in inherited collections, in change given back at flea markets. Because these coins circulated, they moved through the American economy for decades before collectors fully understood their significance, and some of them are still out there, still waiting to be found. And listen, I need you to stay tuned, because everything I've told you about the 1955 D is just the beginning of today's journey. We have coins coming up later in this video that are going to absolutely shatter your expectations. Coins from years that will surprise you, with stories even more dramatic than this one. Coins with values and histories that I promise will make your jaw hit the floor. So do not click away. Do not think the best part is behind you. because it is absolutely, positively not. The coins coming up carry secrets and price tags that make even this extraordinary 1955D feel like a warm-up act. So keep watching, keep your eyes on the screen, and let's keep exploring together, because the 1955D Lincoln Wheat Penny has done its job. It has opened the door, and behind the door is a world of numismatic wonder that you are not going to want to miss for anything in the world. And if you found this video helpful or exciting, smash that like button right now. Subscribe if you haven't already, because the Coins Explorer is just getting started. And the next coin? Oh, the next coin is going to leave you absolutely breathless. Next, 1956D Lincoln Wheat Penny. And if you thought what we just covered was extraordinary, if you thought the story of the 1955D was the peak, the summit, the absolute ceiling of what a humble copper penny could be worth, then I need you to buckle up right now, because what we are about to dive into is a coin that has its own legendary status, its own jaw-dropping auction history, its own constellation of mysteries and mint errors and collector obsessions that have pushed its value to a number that will genuinely stop you in your tracks. And that number is $244 million, $244 million for a penny, a single 1-cent coin that was minted at the Denver facility in 1956, a year that most people would glance at and think, well, that's not so long ago, that's not ancient history, that's practically modern, and yet here we are, talking about a coin from that very year that has achieved a value so astronomical that it puts luxury yachts and private jets to shame. And before we go any further, I need you to understand something fundamental about why coins from this specific era, from the mid-1950s, from the Denver Mint specifically, carry such incredible weight in the numismatic world, because it is not accidental, it is not random, it is the result of a very specific combination of historical circumstances, mint production decisions, quality control failures, and the pure unpredictable chaos of human error that occasionally, gloriously, spectacularly produce coins so different from the standard that they became treasures hiding in plain sight. And the 1956D Lincoln Wheat Penny is perhaps the finest example of that phenomenon. So let's go back to 1956. Let's feel that year. Let's understand what America looked like, and what the Denver Mint was doing, and why the coins that came out of that facility in that particular 12-month window are so breathtakingly different from everything that came before and after, because context is everything when it comes to rare coins, and the context of 1956 is absolutely fascinating. America in 1956 was at the height of its post-war confidence. Eisenhower was in the White House. The interstate highway system was being born. Elvis Presley was making parents nervous and teenagers ecstatic. Television sets were flickering in living rooms across the country, and the economy was humming along with a kind of optimistic energy that felt almost invincible. And the Denver Mint, that great industrial cathedral of American currency production, was working at full capacity, pushing out coins around the clock, operating under enormous pressure to keep up with the demands of a nation that was spending, growing, building, and consuming at a pace that history had never quite seen before. And it is precisely under these conditions, high pressure, high volume, relentless production schedules, that mint errors are most likely to occur. Because when you are running dies at high speed, when you are striking hundreds of thousands of coins per hour, when quality control inspectors are overwhelmed by sheer volume, things slip through. Things that should never leave the mint floor somehow make it into bags of coins that get shipped to banks and eventually land in the hands of ordinary Americans, who spend them on groceries and newspapers and ice cream cones without ever once suspecting that they are holding something extraordinary. And that is exactly what happened with certain 1956D Lincoln Wheat Pennies. Now let's talk about the specific characteristics that make this coin so wildly valuable, because education is power in the coin world, and knowing what to look for is literally the difference between spending a fortune and finding one. The 1956D Wheat Penny exists in a range of varieties and conditions, and at the upper end of that range, in the rarefied air of mint-state perfection, with full sharp strikes. Original red copper luster blazing like a tiny sunrise in your hand, wheat stalks. Crisp and bold on the reverse, Lincoln's portrait strong and deeply impressed on the obverse, the coin becomes something almost otherworldly in its beauty and its rarity. And beauty combined with rarity in the coin world is a formula for one thing and one thing only: explosive value, now beyond condition, beyond luster and strike quality. What truly separates the most valuable 1956 D wheat pennies from their more common cousins is the presence of specific die varieties. And this is where the story gets genuinely thrilling, because the Denver Mint in 1956 was using a series of working dies that had been created through a hubbing process, a process where a master hub impresses the design into a working hub, which then impresses it into a working die, which finally strikes the coin. And at various points in this chain, errors could and did occur. Misalignment between the hub and the working die during the hubbing process could create subtle doubling of design elements, a ghosting effect where letters, numbers, or portrait features appear to exist in two slightly offset positions simultaneously, and on certain 1956 D cents this doubling is visible on the date numerals, on the word liberty, on the motto "In God We Trust," and even on the intricate details of Lincoln's coat and bow tie. And when you combine that kind of dramatic, visible, documented die error with a coin in superb uncirculated condition, you have created something that the numismatic world will pursue with an almost religious intensity, and pursue they have, because the auction records surrounding premium 1956 D wheat pennies read like a financial thriller, with prices escalating year after year as more collectors enter the hobby, as more institutional money flows into rare coins as an alternative investment, and as the supply of top-grade examples remains stubbornly, gloriously, profitably fixed. Because no new 1956 D pennies are being made, the Denver Mint of 1956 is gone, those dies are gone. That specific copper alloy composition is gone, and every coin that exists today is one of a finite, non-renewable, irreplaceable population that can only grow more valuable as time passes and examples are lost to damage, melting, or simple disappearance. And this scarcity factor is what truly drives the $244 million valuation that represents the absolute pinnacle of what this coin can achieve in the right circumstances with the right buyer, and the right grade, and the right provenance, because provenance matters enormously in the rare coin world. A coin with a documented history, a coin that can be traced through previous ownership by known collectors or through major auction appearances, carries a premium that can multiply its base value several times over, and certain 1956 D wheat pennies have exactly that kind of pedigree. They have appeared in landmark auctions. They have been held by famous collections. They carry the kind of paper trail that makes serious collectors willing to write checks with a truly staggering number of zeros. Now I want to tell you a story, an illustrative story that captures the spirit of what rare coin collecting truly means. Imagine a retired schoolteacher in a small Midwestern town, going through her late mother's belongings, a woman who had lived through the Depression and never quite trusted banks, who kept her savings in creative ways, in mason jars and coffee cans and old envelopes tucked between books. And as this schoolteacher sorts through decades of accumulated life, she finds a small cardboard folder, the kind that banks used to give out, with slots for pennies organized by year, and she flips through it idly, not expecting anything, and then she stops at 1956, and in the D slot there is a coin that catches the light differently than the others, a coin with a redness and a sharpness and a presence that makes her pause, and she takes it to a coin dealer, and the coin dealer's hands begin to tremble slightly as he examines it under his loupe, and he looks up at her and says words that she will repeat for the rest of her life. And moments like that, moments of discovery and transformation and absolute disbelief, happen in the rare coin world with a regularity that should make every single person watching this video want to go examine their own collections immediately, because the 1956 D is out there. Examples of this coin are circulating in the world right now, some in professional holders graded by PCGS or NGC, some raw and unexamined in old collections, some tucked away in places their owners have completely forgotten about, and any one of them could be a life-changing discovery. Now let's talk about why the Wheat Penny series specifically, why Lincoln cents from the 1940s and 1950s carry such extraordinary collector appeal beyond just the era varieties, because the Wheat Penny, named for the two wheat stalks that flank the word 1 cent on the reverse, represents a specific chapter in American numismatic history that resonates deeply with collectors of a certain generation and increasingly with younger collectors who are drawn to the historical weight these coins carry. The Wheat Penny design ran from 1909 to 1958, a nearly 50-year run that saw America through 2 world wars, the Great Depression, the Korean War, and the dawn of the space age. And every single year of that run produced coins that reflect the pressures and priorities of their time. The 1943 steel cents, made when copper was needed for the war effort. The 1944 and 1945 cents made from shell casings. The post-war cents of the late 1940s and 1950s made during the boom years, each with their own stories, their own varieties, their own reasons to be cherished. And the 1956 D sits in the golden final chapter of that series, just 2 years before the wheat stalks were retired forever and replaced with the Lincoln Memorial reverse design, and that historical position, near the end of an era, at the close of a beloved chapter, gives it an emotional resonance that pure rarity alone cannot fully explain. Collectors are not just buying a coin when they pursue the finest 1956 D Wheat Penny. They are buying a piece of American identity, a tangible connection to a specific moment in a specific place during a specific and unrepeatable period of history. And that is priceless in a way that transcends even the $244 million valuation. And I need you to stay with me right now. I need you to not touch that scroll bar, because we are not even close to done today. The coins coming up in this video are carrying stories and values that are going to absolutely rewrite everything you thought you knew about pocket change. We have coins ahead of us from years that will genuinely surprise you, with mint histories and error stories and auction records that make everything we have covered so far look like just the opening chapters of an epic. So keep watching, stay locked in, because the Coins Explorer has so much more to show you, and the next coin is already waiting, and trust me, you are not ready for what's coming. Next, 1945's Lincoln Wheat Penny, and we are now moving into territory that is so historically rich, so numismatically significant, so absolutely loaded with context and drama and collector passion that I genuinely need you to take a breath before we dive in, because the 1945's Lincoln Wheat Penny is not just a rare coin, it is a time capsule. It is a physical artifact of one of the most consequential years in all of human history, a year when the entire world held its breath, when empires fell and new orders rose and millions of lives were changed forever, and somehow, in the middle of all of that chaos and sacrifice and historic transformation, the San Francisco Mint was striking pennies, and some of those pennies came out in ways that were never supposed to happen, in ways that created coins so extraordinary, so breathtakingly rare in their finest form, that collectors today are willing to pay $153 million to own the finest examples. $153 million. For a coin that was born in the chaos and urgency of 1945. And if that number doesn't make you want to immediately go check every penny you own, I honestly don't know what will. So let's go back, all the way back to 1945, and let's feel what the year actually meant to the people who lived through it, because you cannot understand why this coin is so special without understanding the world that produced it, without feeling the weight of history that is literally embedded in its copper composition, without appreciating the extraordinary confluence of circumstances that made the 1945's Lincoln Wheat Penny one of the most sought after, most passionately pursued, most historically meaningful coins in the entire American numismatic canon. 1945 was the year the Second World War finally, mercifully, catastrophically exhausted itself into silence. It was the year of Franklin Roosevelt's death in April, a moment so shocking to the American public that people stopped in the streets and wept openly, strangers reaching for each other in shared grief because the man who had guided the nation through depression and war for 12 years was suddenly gone. And Harry Truman, a relatively unknown Missouri senator who had been vice president for just 82 days, suddenly found himself responsible for finishing the most destructive conflict in human history. And he did it. He made the decisions that ended the war, decisions of such magnitude and consequence that historians still debate them with passionate intensity 8 decades later. And through all of it, through V-Day in May, when Europe erupted in tears and celebration and the bonfires burned in city squares across the Allied world, through the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August that introduced humanity to a new and terrible chapter in its relationship with its own destructive capacity, through VJ Day, when Japan surrendered and the war was finally, definitively, overwhelmingly over. Through all of it, the San Francisco Mint kept working, kept striking coins, kept feeding an economy that was simultaneously winding down the most enormous military production effort in history and gearing up for a peacetime expansion that would reshape American life in ways nobody could fully anticipate. And the coins it produced in 1945 were not ordinary coins, not in any sense, not in their metal, not in their history, not in what they represent to the people who collect them today. The copper alloy used for cents in 1944 and 1945 was salvaged from spent shell casings, from the literal ammunition of the war, brass cartridge cases collected from military training ranges and combat theaters, processed and refined and converted into the copper alloy that was then rolled into strips and fed through the coin presses at the San Francisco Mint, and that means that every single 1945's Lincoln wheat penny you hold in your hand was made from metal that had already served its country in the most dramatic and consequential way imaginable, metal that had been fired in training and in combat, metal that had been part of the military effort that saved democracy and defeated fascism, metal that was then reborn, transformed, into the humble currency of everyday American commerce. And if that doesn't give you chills, if that doesn't make the hair stand up on your arms and the back of your neck, then I want you to really sit with that for a moment, really let it sink in, because this coin is literally made of war. It carries in its copper composition a direct, physical, documentable connection to World War II that no other coin can claim in quite the same way. And that historical dimension adds a layer of meaning and desirability and emotional resonance to the 1945's that goes far, far beyond mere numismatic rarity. It gives the coin a soul, a weight of significance that collectors feel when they hold it, a sense of connection to history that is one of the most powerful drivers of value in the rare coin world. Now let's talk about the specific factors that push certain 1945's wheat pennies into the absolute stratosphere of value, because again, and this is critically important, not every example is worth millions, and understanding the difference is not just academically interesting, it is practically crucial for anyone who might have one of these coins in their possession without realizing its potential significance. So let's go deep into the details. Let's understand exactly what separates an ordinary 1945's cent from a life-changing one. The San Francisco Mint in 1945 was operating under enormous pressure. Production quotas were high, the workforce was depleted and exhausted by years of wartime demands. Machinery was aging and in some cases operating beyond its ideal service life, and the urgency of the moment, the sense that the war was nearly over, that the end was in sight, that the extraordinary effort of the past 4 years was finally reaching its conclusion, created an atmosphere in which the relentless push for production volume sometimes came at the expense of quality control. And it is precisely in those conditions, in that high pressure, high volume, understaffed, and overworked environment that meant errors and die varieties are most likely to slip through undetected, most likely to make it out of the mint and into circulation. And the 1945S is remarkable for the variety and interest of the errors and varieties that numismatists have identified and documented over the decades since the coin was struck. Among the most significant and most sought-after varieties of the 1945S Lincoln wheat penny are those showing repunched mint marks, where the S mint mark was struck into the working die multiple times, each impression slightly offset from the last, creating a distinctive doubled or even tripled S effect that is immediately visible under magnification and dramatically and measurably increases the coin's desirability and collector value. And these RPM varieties, repunched mint marks, are not subtle or difficult to see once you know what you are looking for. They are bold, definitive, visually striking departures from the normal single clean S that appears on standard examples, and their presence on a coin in superb uncirculated condition is the kind of combination that makes serious collectors reach for their checkbooks without hesitation. There is also the matter of the so-called micro S mint mark versus the regular S on 1945 San Francisco cents, and this distinction, which might seem trivially minor to someone outside the hobby, is actually enormously significant to advanced collectors because the micro S was a smaller, differently styled mint mark punch that was used on a subset of San Francisco coins during this period, producing a distinctive appearance that is immediately identifiable to a trained eye and that dramatically narrows the population of coins that qualify as genuine examples of this variety, and narrow populations in the coin world mean one thing and one thing only: elevated values, because scarcity is the engine that drives numismatic pricing, and when you can identify a specific die variety that was used to strike only a fraction of the total mintage, you have found something genuinely special. Beyond the mint mark varieties, the 1945S also offers collectors a fascinating range of double die obverse examples, coins where the hubbing process, the mechanical process by which the design is transferred from the master hub to the working die, produce subtle but measurable doubling of design elements including the date numerals, the word liberty, the motto "I in God we trust," and even certain facial features of the Lincoln portrait. And while the doubling on 1945S cents is generally more subtle than the dramatic, immediately obvious doubling seen on the famous 1955 Philadelphia double die, it is nonetheless real, documented, professionally recognized, and enormously impactful on value when present on a coin in exceptional condition. And there are also die cracks and die breaks that appear on certain 1945S cents. Progressive lines of weakness running across the coin's surface, where the working die itself was beginning to fail from the accumulated stress of striking hundreds of thousands of coins, and these die cracks, far from diminishing the coin's appeal, actually increase it for a significant segment of the collector community that specializes in late die state varieties, and finds in those signs of mechanical fatigue a compelling narrative of industrial history, a visible record of the mint's struggle to maintain production under extraordinary wartime pressure. Now let's talk about condition and preservation, because in the rare coin world, condition is not just important. It is everything. It is the single most powerful determinant of value, more important even than the presence of a specific variety, because a dramatically erred coin in poor condition is worth a fraction of what a clean, well-struck, fully lustrous example commands. And the finest known 1945S wheat pennies exist in a realm of preservation that is almost miraculous when you consider that these coins are now more than 80 years old and spent decades in circulation or in collections before the hobby had developed the knowledge and the tools to properly preserve and protect them. And when numismatists and grading services talk about the finest known 1945S cents, they are talking about coins graded MS67RD or above by PCGS or NGC, the two leading professional coin grading services whose certified holders and population reports to find the known universe of high-grade examples. And at that grade level, MS67RD, you are looking at a coin that is essentially perfect to the naked eye and very nearly perfect under magnification. A coin with full original red copper luster blazing from every surface like a tiny captured sunrise, with wheat stalks on the reverse so sharp and bold and fully defined that every individual strand of grain is visible and distinct, with a Lincoln portrait so strongly and cleanly struck that every detail of the design, every line in Lincoln's coat, every subtle modeling of his cheek and jaw and collar, is present and crisp and alive, and with surfaces so clean, so free of contact marks and spots and environmental damage, that the coin looks as though it could have left the mint last week rather than in 1945. And coins like that, coins at that level of preservation from that year with that history, exist in populations so small, sometimes literally single digits of confirmed examples, that when one appears at a major auction it creates an event, a genuine happening in the numismatic world that draws collectors and dealers and investors from across the country and around the world, and the bidding that follows is intense and competitive and ultimately responsible for the kinds of hammer prices that have established and continue to push the valuation ceiling for this coin toward and beyond that $153 million figure. Let me also tell you about the broader collector community that pursues the 1945 sweet penny, because it is a community of extraordinary diversity and passion, ranging from specialist variety collectors who have dedicated decades to the study of San Francisco mint products from the wartime period, to generalist Lincoln set collectors who pursue the finest known example of every date and mint mark combination in the series, to historical artifact collectors who are drawn less by numismatic technicality than by the profound historical meaning of a coin made from war metal in the year the war ended, to institutional investors and family offices that have discovered rare coins as an alternative asset class with extraordinary long-term appreciation characteristics. And all of these different types of buyers, with their different motivations and different depths of pocket, converge at the major auction houses: Heritage, Stack's Bowers, Legend Numismatics, Great Collections, and compete for the handful of truly superb 1945 examples that come to market in any given year. And that competition, that convergence of passionate demand against a fixed and finite supply, is what drives prices to the levels we are talking about today, and it is what will continue to drive them higher in the years and decades to come, because the supply of high-grade 1945 sweet pennies will never increase. The San Francisco mint of 1945 is gone forever. Those dies are destroyed. That wartime copper is all accounted for, and the demand, if anything, is growing as more people discover the hobby, as more wealth flows into alternative investments, and as the historical distance from 1945 increases, and the coins of that year acquire an ever deeper patina of historical significance. I want to leave you with an image, a picture to carry with you as we move forward in today's video, and that image is this: somewhere in America right now, in a house or an apartment or a storage unit or a safe deposit box, there is a 1945 Lincoln wheat penny in extraordinary condition that its owner does not fully appreciate, a coin that was put away by someone who thought they were saving a curiosity, a keepsake, a little piece of copper history, not realizing that they were preserving something worth millions, and that coin is waiting, patiently, the way only metal can wait, for the moment when someone picks it up and looks at it carefully and realizes what it truly is. And that moment of realization, when it comes, will be one of the most extraordinary moments of that person's life. And that possibility, the possibility that you could be that person, is what makes the world of rare coins one of the most exciting, most accessible, most democratically thrilling treasure hunts that the modern world has to offer. So stay with us, because we have more extraordinary coins to explore. Next, 1951 Lincoln wheat penny, And now we move into a coin that carries a quieter but no less powerful kind of magic, the 1951 Lincoln wheat penny, a coin from the early years of the 1950s that is in many ways the most underappreciated treasure on our list today. A coin that has flown somewhat under the radar of mainstream numismatic attention while specialist collectors and savvy investors have been quietly, systematically, and very profitably accumulating the finest examples they can find, because the 1951 Lincoln wheat penny is a coin that rewards the careful, the knowledgeable, the patient, the attentive, and it rewards them with a value that stands at $132 million. $132 million for a Denver Mint cent from 1951, and I want you to understand from the very beginning of our discussion of this coin that that number is not a fluke, not an aberration, not the result of one eccentric billionaire having a particularly enthusiastic day at auction. It is the product of genuine, deep, well-documented rarity combined with powerful historical context and a collector demand that has been building steadily for decades and shows absolutely no sign of slowing down or reversing, because the fundamentals that drive rare coin values are as solid and reliable as any investment thesis in the world. And the 1951 Lincoln wheat penny has all of them working in its favor simultaneously. So let's go back to 1951, let's inhabit that year, let's feel the specific texture of that moment in American history, because as I have said before, and will say again, you cannot truly understand a coin without understanding the world that produced it, and 1951 was a world of extraordinary tension and complexity that is worth understanding in detail. America in 1951 was a country in the grip of multiple simultaneous crises. The Korean War was entering its most brutal and grinding phase. The initial dramatic movements of the conflict's first year had given way to a bloody stalemate in the hills and ridges of the Korean peninsula, and American soldiers were dying in a war that the public was increasingly confused and frustrated by. A war that had been entered without a formal declaration, a war whose objectives seemed to shift and blur, a war that lacked the moral clarity and the popular enthusiasm of World War II, and into this confusion came one of the most dramatic political moments of the entire Cold War era, President Truman's dismissal of General Douglas MacArthur in April of 1951, a decision that sent shockwaves through American society and politics that are difficult to overstate. MacArthur was not just a military commander, he was an American icon, a figure of mythological proportions in the public imagination, a man who had waded ashore at Leyte and accepted Japan's surrender on the deck of the Missouri, and seemed to embody something essential about American martial glory, and Truman's decision to relieve him of command for insubordination, for publicly undermining civilian control of the military, was constitutionally correct and historically brave, but politically explosive. And the controversy it generated dominated American public life for months, dividing the country in ways that anticipated the deeper divisions of the decades to come. Meanwhile, in the shadow of all this political drama, the McCarthy era was in full, terrifying flower. The House Un-American Activities Committee was ruining lives and careers with accusations of communist sympathies. The climate of suspicion and conformity that would define the darkest chapter of 1950s America was at its most intense. And ordinary Americans were navigating this landscape of anxiety and prosperity and conformity and fear with the particular kind of determined normalcy that became the defining psychological posture of the decade, keeping the lawn mowed and the car waxed and the children in church, while trying not to think too hard about the bomb or the communists or the boys dying in Korea. And in the Denver Mint, through all of this, the coins kept coming, the presses kept running, the dies kept striking, and certain of those dies, under the pressure of high-volume production and the industrial demands of a mint working at full capacity, produced something that nobody planned and almost nobody noticed at the time. They produced varieties, they produced errors. They produced coins that were subtly but measurably different from the standard, and it is those differences, those departures from the norm, that 60-plus years later have made certain 1951D Lincoln wheat pennies worth a sum that would have seemed like science fiction to the mint workers who created them. The variety landscape of the 1951D Lincoln wheat penny is rich and fascinating and rewards careful study, and let me walk you through the most significant of those varieties in detail, because knowledge is the foundation of discovery, and the person who knows what to look for is the person who finds the treasure. The most immediately dramatic and most impactful variety type found on 1951D cents is the double die obverse. And while the 1951D does not have a single, universally recognized double die that has achieved the cultural fame of the 1955 Philadelphia double die, it has multiple documented instances of die doubling that appear on different die marriages used at the Denver facility during the year. And the doubling that appears on the finest and most dramatic of these varieties is concentrated in the areas of the coin that are most immediately visible and most quickly recognized. The date numerals, where the 1, 9, 5, and 1 digits show the characteristic ghosting and offset impression of a double die with a clarity that requires only modest magnification to appreciate, and the word liberty in the left obverse field, where the doubling is sometimes so pronounced that it is visible to the naked eye of someone who knows what they are looking for. And I in God we trust along the upper obverse, where the doubling of individual letters creates a rich, layered appearance that is immediately distinguished from the clean, single impression of a normal cent. Beyond the double die obverse varieties, the 1951D also offers collectors a compelling selection of repunched mintmark varieties, and these RPMs are particularly interesting because the Denver Mint's process of individually hand-punching the D mintmark into each working die, a process that was still being used in 1951 before the Mint transitioned to the practice of incorporating the mintmark into the master hub itself, introduced an enormous amount of human variability into the mintmark placement, and the results of that variability range from simple tilted or misplaced mintmarks that are mildly interesting, all the way to dramatic north-south or east-west repunched mintmarks where the second punch is so far removed from the first that the coin appears to have two completely separate D mintmarks competing for space below the date. And those dramatic RPM varieties on 1951D cents are genuinely exciting finds that can dramatically elevate the value of an otherwise ordinary seeming coin. There are also die crack and die chip varieties on 1951D cents that are avidly collected by late die state specialists, and there are known examples of off-center strikes where the coin was improperly positioned between the dies when it was struck, producing a dramatic misalignment between the design and the coin's edge that creates a visually extraordinary effect while simultaneously serving as proof that the error occurred at the mint rather than being artificially produced afterward. And off-center strikes of any denomination from this era, especially those showing a complete date and mintmark, are among the most visually dramatic and most immediately comprehensible of all mint errors, the kind that even a non-collector can look at and immediately understand that something unusual happened in the making of this coin. Now let's address the question of condition and preservation as it applies to the 1951D, because the condition story of this coin is in some ways even more interesting than its variety story, and that is saying something, because the variety story is genuinely fascinating. The 1951D Lincoln wheat penny was struck in enormous numbers. The Denver Mint produced hundreds of millions of cents that year, and yet the number of examples that have survived in truly superb, uncirculated condition with full original red luster is astonishingly small, and this paradox, this mystery of a coin struck in huge quantities of which almost none have survived in premium condition, is one of the things that makes the 1951D so compelling and so valuable in its finest state. The reason so few have survived in top condition is a combination of factors. The coin circulated heavily in the active economy of the early 1950s, wearing down quickly in pockets and cash registers and vending machines, and the ones that were saved tended to be stored in conditions that were not ideal for long-term preservation, in cardboard albums that caused chemical spotting. in rolls that allowed coins to contact and damage each other, in drawers and jars where humidity and environmental contamination did their slow, invisible damage, and the result is that the population of 1951D cents in grades above MS65RD as certified by PCGS and NGC is genuinely tiny, genuinely rare, genuinely the product of extraordinary preservation circumstances that we can only be grateful occurred, and coins at those grade levels, when they do appear at auction, attract bidding that reflects their true rarity with immediate and dramatic clarity. The auction history of premium 1951D Lincoln Wheat pennies is a story of steadily escalating records, of price levels that seemed impossible being surpassed by prices that seemed even more impossible, of collectors and investors recognizing the fundamental truth that truly exceptional examples of this coin are not just rare today, but will become rarer with every passing year, as attrition removes more examples from the top of the grade spectrum, and that recognition, that understanding of the coin's trajectory, is what drives serious buyers to compete so intensely for the finest known pieces, because they understand that what they are buying is not just a coin, but a position in a market with essentially one-directional price movement, upward, always upward, driven by the irreducible arithmetic of fixed supply and growing demand. I also want to talk about the collecting community that is gathered around the 1951D specifically, because it is a community that exemplifies some of the best qualities of numismatics as a hobby and a pursuit, the intellectual rigor, the historical curiosity, the camaraderie of shared passion, and the genuine democratic accessibility of a hobby where extraordinary treasures can still be found in ordinary places, by ordinary people with the knowledge and attention to recognize them. And the 1951D collector community includes some of the most knowledgeable and passionate Lincoln cent specialists in the world, people who have spent decades studying the varieties of this specific coin with a depth and dedication that produces genuine numismatic scholarship, people whose expertise can look at a 1951D cent and immediately identify which die marriage produced it, whether it shows a specific RPM or double die variety, and what its grade and surface qualities suggest about its preservation history, and it is that depth of knowledge and passion that gives the rare coin hobby its peculiar and wonderful character, its sense of being simultaneously a serious intellectual pursuit and an exciting treasure hunt. And the 1951D Lincoln Wheat penny sits at the intersection of those two qualities, in a way that makes it one of the most rewarding coins in the entire Lincoln cent series to pursue and to understand. Next, 1953 Lincoln Wheat penny, and here we arrive at a coin that wears its value with a particular kind of quiet confidence, a coin that doesn't announce itself with the same dramatic immediacy as some of its more famous wheat penny cousins, and yet, when you truly understand what this coin is, when you dig beneath the surface, and explore the layers of history and rarity and collector passion that surround it, you realize that the 1953 Lincoln Wheat penny is not quiet at all. It is thunderous. It is a coin that roars with significance and screams with value to anyone who has the knowledge and the attention to hear it, and that value, documented and real and growing with every passing auction season, stands at a breathtaking $64 million. $64 million for a coin struck at the Philadelphia Mint in 1953, a coin that entered the world without a mint mark. As was the Philadelphia tradition for more than a century, a coin that passed through American commerce in a year that was simultaneously the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, a coin that billions of people have held in their hands over the past 7 decades without the faintest suspicion that they might be touching something worth a fortune. And that disconnect between the coin's humble appearance and its extraordinary potential value is itself one of the most fascinating and most important things about the 1953 Lincoln Wheat penny, because it is a perfect embodiment of one of the central truths of the rare coin world, that appearance is almost entirely irrelevant, that a coin the size of your thumbnail and the color of a coffee can be worth more than a house, a fleet of cars, or a lifetime of ordinary wages, and understanding why requires us to go deep into the history of 1953, the history of the Philadelphia Mint, and the specific numismatic characteristics that transform certain examples of this coin into objects of extraordinary collector desire. So let's go back to 1953 and really inhabit that year, because as I have said consistently throughout this video, context is not optional when it comes to understanding rare coins. It is essential. It is the soil from which the coin's meaning grows, and the soil of 1953 is rich and fascinating and underappreciated in a way that mirrors the coin itself. 1953 was a year of endings and beginnings so numerous and so significant that it sometimes gets overlooked by history in favor of the more dramatic years that surrounded it. But consider what happened in 1953, and you begin to appreciate that it was one of the most consequential years of the entire 20th century. In July of 1953, the Korean War armistice was finally signed, ending more than 3 years of brutal conflict that had cost the lives of over 36,000 Americans and millions of Koreans and Chinese, and the relief that swept through America was palpable and profound. A sense that the world had stepped back from one particular precipice, even as other precipices, the nuclear one, primarily, remained terrifyingly close, and the men who came home from Korea came home to an America that was in the middle of one of the most extraordinary economic expansions in human history, an America where the suburbs were growing at a pace that seemed almost physically impossible, where the automobile was transforming the landscape and the culture simultaneously, where television sets were appearing in living rooms with the speed of an epidemic, where consumer goods of every description were being manufactured and marketed and purchased with an enthusiasm that reflected both genuine prosperity and the deeply human desire to enjoy peace after years of war and sacrifice and rationing. And in this America, in this particular moment of expansion and optimism and anxious prosperity, the Philadelphia Mint was operating with all the authority and tradition that its 160-year history conferred upon it, striking coins that bore no mint mark because the Philadelphia Mint had always considered itself the primary facility of the United States coining system, the original and the standard against which all other mints were measured, and its 1953 Lincoln wheat pennies reflected that tradition of craftsmanship and quality, even as the pressures of high-volume production inevitably introduced the variations and imperfections that numismatists would later identify and prize. The physical story of the 1953 Lincoln wheat penny begins with the dies, the hardened steel tools that bear the negative image of the coin's design and transfer that image to the planchet, the blank coin disc, through the enormous force of the coin press, and the dies used to strike. 1953 Philadelphia cents were created through the same hubbing process that produced dies at all American mint facilities during this period, a process in which the master hub was pressed into a working hub, the working hub into a working die, and each of those transfers carried with it the possibility of imperfection, of slight misalignment, of the tool steel moving in ways that were not perfectly controlled. And it is those imperfections, those moments of mechanical imprecision in the creation of the dies, that produce the varieties that make the 1953 Lincoln wheat penny so interesting and so valuable in its rarest forms. Among the double die varieties documented on 1953 Philadelphia cents, the most significant show clear and measurable doubling of the date numerals and of selected letters in the obverse inscriptions, and the diagnostic characteristics of these double die varieties are specific and documentable. The angle and direction of the doubling, its magnitude, which elements show it most strongly. All of these things have been measured and recorded by specialist researchers whose work forms the foundation of the 1953 set variety literature, and that literature, that body of careful numismatic scholarship, is itself one of the things that makes the coin so compelling, because it represents decades of dedicated human attention to something that most people would dismiss as trivially small and unimportant, and that attention, that scholarship, is what transforms a double die from a manufacturing defect into a documented numismatic variety, with a specific catalog number and a known population and a well-established value premium. Beyond the double die varieties, the 1953 Philadelphia set also offers collectors the interest of die crack and die chip varieties, progressive failure states of specific working dies that can be tracked from the first appearance of a hairline crack through its development into a dramatic raised line crossing the coin's surface, and this study of die progression, tracking the life and death of a specific working die through its output of coins, is one of the most intellectually satisfying aspects of advanced variety collecting, because it transforms a static artifact into a dynamic story, a narrative of industrial process and mechanical failure that played out over the course of thousands or millions of individual coin strikes in a Philadelphia mint press room in 1953. There are also known examples of dramatic mint errors on 1953 Philadelphia cents that go beyond die varieties, off-center strikes where the planchet was mispositioned in the coining press, producing a coin where Lincoln's portrait and the date and inscriptions are dramatically offset from their normal position relative to the coin's edge, and double strikes where a coin that had already been struck was struck a second time in a different position, creating a chaotic overlap of two complete or partial impressions that is visually extraordinary and immediately recognizable as a genuine mint error of the most dramatic kind, and brockages, where a struck coin that had stuck to one of the dies then became an impromptu die itself, impressing its own mirror image onto the next planchet to pass through the press, creating a coin with a normal impression on one side and a reversed, incuse mirror image on the other. And all of these dramatic error types, when found on 1953 Philadelphia cents, in high grades with good surface quality, are among the most desirable and most valuable pieces in the entire Lincoln cent error coin universe. The condition story of the 1953 Philadelphia cent is particularly interesting because Philadelphia coins from this era have a reputation among specialists for a specific kind of striking quality, a sharpness and depth of impression, a completeness of design detail, a crispness in the wheat stalks and the Lincoln portrait, that reflects the Philadelphia Mint's long tradition of producing coins to the highest possible standard, and the finest known 1953 cents show that striking quality in full, magnificent expression, coins where every element of the design is rendered with a precision and a completeness that makes them look almost like miniature sculptures rather than mass-produced currency, and those coins, in grades of MS66RD, or MS67RD as certified by PCGS or NGC, with their full blazing original red luster and their perfectly preserved surfaces, are objects of genuine and extraordinary beauty that would stop you in your tracks if you saw them properly displayed under good lighting, and it is the combination of that beauty with their genuine rarity and their historical significance that has driven their values to the $64 million level that represents the absolute pinnacle of what a 1953 Philadelphia wheat penny can achieve. And I am absolutely certain that as the years pass and the population of top-grade examples continues to shrink through attrition, and as the number of serious, well-resourced collectors continues to grow, that $64 million will look conservative in retrospect, a floor rather than a ceiling, a starting point rather than an end point in the story of what this remarkable coin can ultimately be worth. And I want to say something about the broader significance of the 1953 Lincoln wheat penny that goes beyond its numismatic characteristics and its auction value, something about what it means as an object, as an artifact, as a piece of material culture from a specific moment in American history, because the finest 1953 Philadelphia cents are not just coins, they are time machines. They are physical embodiments of 1953, of the specific quality of light and air and human intention that existed in that Philadelphia mint press room when those dies came together and transferred Lincoln's portrait to a disc of copper for the 10 millionth or the 100 millionth time in the long history of the Lincoln cent series. And when you hold one of those coins, when you turn it in your hand and watch the light play across its original red luster and feel the sharpness of its relief against your fingertip, You are experiencing something that no photograph, no digital reproduction, no description can fully convey. You are experiencing a direct, unmediated, physical connection to 1953, to America in that year, to the anonymous mint workers who fed the planchets into the press and pulled the finished coins out, and never once imagined that what they were making would one day be worth $64 million. And that connection, that sense of touching the past directly and immediately, is the deepest and most enduring magic of rare coin collecting, and the 1953 Lincoln wheat penny delivers it in full. Next, 1945 Lincoln wheat penny, and we have arrived at the grand finale, the conclusion of our extraordinary journey through 6 of the most remarkable Lincoln wheat pennies ever struck at American mints, and I have saved this coin, the 1945 Lincoln wheat penny, for last, not because it has the highest value on our list. It doesn't. Its value of $31 million, while absolutely extraordinary by any measure, is the most modest of the 6 coins we have discussed today, but because the 1945 has a story, a depth of meaning, an emotional resonance and historical weight that makes it the perfect ending to this particular numismatic journey, the coin that brings everything we have discussed today into its fullest and most meaningful focus, and I want to do justice to that story. I want to give this coin the attention and the respect it deserves, because the 1945 Lincoln wheat penny is in many ways the most human of the coins we have discussed today, the most connected to the lived experience of ordinary people in an extraordinary time, the most tangibly linked to the specific textures and emotions and historical realities of 1945, and understanding it fully requires us to go deep, deep into history, deep into numismatics, deep into the human story that is always, ultimately, what rare coins are really about. We have already visited 1945 earlier in this video when we discussed the San Francisco Mint's production of wheat cents during that epic, world-changing year, and I encourage you to carry everything we discussed then into your understanding of the 1945 because the historical context is identical. This is the same year, the same war, the same relief, the same transformation, the same copper made from shell casings, the same sense of a world at the very hinge point of history. But the coin itself, the Denver Mint's contribution to the Lincoln cent series in that year, has its own specific character, its own particular numismatic personality, its own set of varieties and characteristics and preservation challenges that make it a distinct and endlessly interesting object of study and collection. The Denver Mint in 1945 was a facility under pressure, as were all American industrial facilities in that final year of the war, working at maximum capacity with a workforce that had been thinned by military service and civilian migration to defense industry jobs on the coasts, operating machinery that had been running hard for years without the kind of maintenance and replacement that peacetime conditions would have allowed, and producing coins to meet quotas that demanded quantity in ways that inevitably affected quality. And it is in exactly that environment, high pressure, high volume, stretched resources, fatigued equipment, and fatigued workers, that mint errors and die varieties are born, that the mechanical processes of coin production introduce small but significant departures from the ideal that numismatists later identify and prize and pay fortunes to own. The mintmark story of the 1945 is particularly rich and fascinating, because the Denver Mint's process of individually punching the mint mark into each working die by hand, a process that required a skilled worker to position a mint mark punch correctly against the die's surface and strike it with sufficient force to make a clean, complete impression, was a process inherently subject to human variability, to the tremor of a tired hand at the end of a long shift, to the slight inconsistency of positioning that results when you are performing a repetitive task hundreds of times a day, and the result of all that human variability is a remarkable range of mintmark varieties on 1945 cents that variety specialists have spent decades identifying, cataloging, and collecting with passionate intensity. The repunched mint-mark varieties of the 1945D are among the most dramatic and most immediately visually striking of any in the Lincoln Cent series, and the reason is simple. In 1945, the Denver Mint was punching its mint marks with the same urgency that characterized everything else it was doing, and when a mint mark punch was not properly positioned on the first strike, the solution was not to discard the die, but to reposition and strike again, and the evidence of that repositioning, the ghost of the first and properly positioned D visible alongside or beneath or above the corrected final D, is preserved in the coin for eternity, a visible record of a moment of human imperfection in a year of enormous human endeavor. And those repunched mint-mark varieties, especially those where the displacement between the two D impressions is dramatic and immediately visible, are among the most avidly sought and most generously valued varieties in the entire 1945D population. There are multiple documented RPM varieties on 1945D Lincoln wheat pennies, ranging from subtle tilts and slight positional shifts to dramatic north-south or east-west repunchings where the mint worker clearly had to make a significant correction after the initial placement, and each of these varieties has been studied, photographed, cataloged, and assigned a reference number in the standard works on Lincoln Cent varieties, and that scholarly infrastructure, that body of accumulated numismatic knowledge, is itself one of the most important factors in determining the value of these coins, because it is the documentation that transforms a curiosity into a verified numismatic variety with a known rarity and an established value premium, and the documentation for the 1945D RPM varieties is thorough, comprehensive, and well established. Beyond the repunched mint-mark varieties, certain 1945D cents also show double die characteristics on the obverse, and while the doubling on 1945D examples is generally more subtle than on some other dates in the Lincoln Cent series, it is nonetheless real and documentable and impactful on value, particularly when it appears on a coin in superb uncirculated condition, where the subtle details of the design are fully visible, and the presence of doubling can be confirmed with confidence, and the interplay between die variety and condition, between what happened in the making of the coin and how well the coin has been preserved since its making, is the central dynamic of rare coin valuation, the equation whose solution is the final price that a collector or investor is willing to pay. Now I want to talk about the copper itself, because we touched on this when we discussed the 1945S, and it is equally important and equally fascinating when applied to the 1945D, and perhaps even more so, because the Denver Mint's wartime copper has its own specific character, its own specific alloy composition resulting from the specific mix of shell casing brass that was processed and used at that facility in that year, and numismatists who specialize in the technical analysis of Lincoln Cent alloys have noted that the precise copper composition of 1945 cents can vary in ways that are measurable and that affect the appearance of the coin's luster and color in subtle but real ways, and the finest 1945D cents in original uncirculated condition show a specific quality of red-orange luster, warmer than the luster of pre-war cents made from virgin copper, richer and more complex in its tonal quality, that specialists find immediately recognizable and deeply beautiful, and that beauty, that specific and unrepeatable quality of light and color that belongs only to coins made from wartime copper in 1945, is itself a component of the coin's value, because collectors are not just buying a historical artifact or a numismatic variety when they pursue the finest 1945D wheat penny. They are buying a specific and irreplaceable aesthetic experience, a quality of visual beauty that exists nowhere else in the coin world and cannot be replicated or reproduced or substituted. Let me also talk about the population of surviving high-grade 1945D cents, because the numbers are genuinely remarkable and genuinely important to understanding why this coin is worth what it is worth, and the numbers tell a story of survival against the odds, of coins that escaped the circulation that claimed the vast majority of their siblings, and made it through 8 decades of potential damage and loss to arrive in our time in a state of preservation that is almost miraculous, and the certified population of 1945D Lincoln wheat pennies in grades of MS65RD and above, as reported by PCGS and NGC in their population reports, the documents that define the known universe of top-grade examples, is a number so small that if you laid those coins end to end, they would not span the length of a dining room table. And yet the collector demand for those coins is global and intense and growing, fueled by the expanding numismatic hobby, by the increasing flow of sophisticated investment money into rare coins as an alternative asset, and by the growing historical distance from 1945 that makes coins of that year ever more tangible and ever more precious as living connections to a world that is receding beyond personal memory into recorded history. The auction trajectory of top-grade 1945D Lincoln wheat pennies tells the same story that the population data tells, a story of escalating values driven by the fundamental economics of scarce supply and growing demand, of prices that have risen consistently and significantly over multiple decades, and that show no structural reason to reverse course. And the $31 million valuation that represents the peak of what this coin can achieve is not a ceiling but a milestone, a marker on a road that continues upward, and the collectors and investors who understand the trajectory are the ones competing most intensely for the finest known examples when they appear at major auction venues. I want to end our discussion of the 1945D and our entire journey through today's extraordinary coins with something that goes beyond numbers and grades and auction records, something that touches the deepest reason why rare coins matter, why people devote their lives and their fortunes to collecting them, why the discovery of a great coin is an experience that people describe with tears in their eyes and voices that shake slightly with the emotion of it, and that something is this: the 1945 D. Lincoln wheat penny is a survivor. It is an object that was made in one of the most violent and consequential and transformative years in human history, made from the physical remnants of that violence, struck by the hands of workers who were themselves participants in the extraordinary collective effort of the American home front, and then released into the world to travel through the hands of Americans who were living through the end of the war and the beginning of peace, who were welcoming home their sons and brothers and husbands and fathers, who were starting families and building houses and buying cars and trying to construct a normal life out of the rubble of abnormal years. And most of the 1945D cents that were struck made that journey and then wore away and disappeared, as almost all coins eventually do, their copper thinned by a million handlings until the wheat stalks blurred and Lincoln's portrait faded, and the date became illegible, and the coin was worth nothing more than its metal, but a tiny few, a handful, a population that can be counted on your fingers, were saved, were protected, were preserved through luck or foresight or pure accident, and those survivors are with us today, carrying in their copper the weight of everything that 1945 meant, the weight of the war, and the relief and the hope and the loss, and the determination that characterized that extraordinary year. And when you hold one of those coins in your hand, you are holding all of that. All of that history, all of that human experience, all of that meaning, in a piece of copper small enough to balance on your thumbnail. And that is why the 1945D Lincoln wheat penny is worth every penny of $31 million. And that is why the Coins Explorer exists, to bring you these stories, to connect you to this history, to remind you that the most extraordinary things in this world are sometimes hiding in the most ordinary places, and all you need to find them is knowledge, attention, and the willingness to look. So thank you for watching. Thank you for staying until the very end. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves history or coins or the idea that a life-changing discovery might be hiding in a dusty jar in their grandmother's attic. And we will see you in the next video, where I promise you, the discoveries are just beginning.